Reverend clergy, whose prayers I am sure are responsible for the fine weather we have tonight and the break in the heat wave. President Jackson, members of the faculty and administration, distinguished alumni, special guests, proud parents, and awesome graduates of the class of 2019, your big day has arrived. And it's such a great pleasure for me to share it with you. But I have to tell you that when President Jackson asked me to make the graduation address tonight, I hesitated at first because I questioned how I, nearing the end of my 7th decade, you're supposed to say he doesn't look that old, could say anything that's meaningful to young people not quite out of their teens. Then I thought of when my son was your age, and his mother and I brought him to orientation at his college, Brown University. We were invited to a reception by its then president, Vartan Grigorian, and after his remarks, he asked if anyone had any questions. I raised my hand and asked him why Brown didn't have a core curriculum like other universities. He looked at me and smiled forbearingly and said, "Mr. Gage, our total knowledge doubles every 10 years. How can we have a core curriculum when we live in an age of such tremendous change?" I responded, "I realize that, Dr. Grigorian, but how to appreciate beauty, how to discern truth, how to write a simple declarative sentence well, another basic knowledge an educated person needs doesn't double every 10 years. So recalling that exchange, I agreed to accept President Jackson's invitation to address you tonight because there are some basic truths about education that don't change with the years, and it might be appropriate at this milestone in your lives to give you my short list. As young people, soon to begin your higher education, I know you are filled with ideas and hopes about acquiring the knowledge and developing the skills to make an impact in the world as adults, not only to better yourselves, but to make the world better. Along with a great optimism, I know you are acutely sensitive with what Euripides called the giant agony of the world, injustice. And you will fight it wherever you find it. And I hope that no matter how preoccupied you become in life, you will never cease to find injustice and misery and abuse and manipulation intolerable. Plato defined education as that particular learning which leads you throughout your life to hate what should be hated and to love what should be loved. What then should you love as much as you hate injustice, cruelty, and misery? I will tell you my top 3 choices. The first is the right to live under one's own control and not another's. In a word, a Greek word, eleftheria, freedom. We don't hear much about it when we have it, but listen to what life without freedom can be like. When Greece was under Ottoman rule, the Sultan had a standing order for the seizure of the most attractive, well-bodied, and spirited youths between the ages of 10 and 20 to be trained for the Janissaries, the Sultan's special forces. A 1601 order by the Sultan declared, and I quote, "The infidel parents or anyone else who resists are to be hanged at once in front of their house gate, their blood being considered of no importance whatsoever." End of quote. The idea of personal freedom is a daring concept that we Greeks invented. All societies before the Greeks were a succession of tyrannies. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Hebrews, the Assyrians, the Chinese, all believed that a society without an all-powerful ruler would disintegrate into chaos. It was we Greeks who dared to believe that a society can have both order and freedom. And out of that daring idea have come all the values that the world cherishes today: democracy, human rights, equal justice under law. The second principle I urge you to remember throughout your lives may be called excellence, performance, or simply doing your best at whatever you do. In another Greek word, areti. The truth is that most people don't work at their full potential. In fact, they don't work anywhere near it. So if you put a little extra effort in everything you do, I can guarantee you that you can outperform not only your peers, but also those who are smarter, luckier, or even more talented than you, and you will wind up doing pretty well in life. Let me cite an example of how little extra effort can make a lot of difference from my own experience as a student when I was a graduate at Boston University. When I was a junior there, I was an editor of the Boston University News. A book was published by a respected New York Times drama critic, Arthur Gelb, a biography of the great playwright Eugene O'Neill, the only American playwright to ever win the Nobel Prize. O'Neill died at a Boston hotel that had since become a dormitory of Boston University. And I thought I would do a story for the student paper, and I went to the dormitory, and I went up to the suite, and I looked around, and I saw that there was no fireplace in the suite. And it was crucial because in the biography, Gelb had quoted Mrs. O'Neill that the playwright had asked that all his unfinished plays be torn and burned in the fireplace. And she said it was like burning children. I wanted, I saw that there was no fireplace there, and the next day I went down to the City Hall and checked the file for the hotel, going back to when it was constructed. There was never a fireplace in that building. So I wrote a story saying this dramatic scene in this great biography could not have happened. And the next day, I got a call from the author, Arthur Gelb. He said, how could you question this? I've spent 10 years researching it, and I've got the information directly from his wife. I said, Mr. Gelb, did you go to the hotel? He said, of course I went to the hotel. I've been a reporter for 29 years. I said, did you go up to the room? Well, he said it was raining that day, and I had a train to catch. I didn't quite make it. So I continued my research, and I found a maid that worked for the O'Neills, and she told me how Mrs. O'Neill called her to the suite, and they took torn manuscripts in a wheelbarrow to the basement and burned them in the furnace. And I wrote a second story. And the author, Arthur Gelb, called me and congratulated me on my research methods and advised me that I should become a journalist. 6 years later, Arthur Gelb became a top editor of the New York Times, and the first person he hired as, in his position was the little Greek kid from Boston University. And whenever I would do some controversial stories, he would come to me and he would say, Nick, are you 100% sure about your facts? Because if you're wrong, not only would you lose your job, but I'll lose my job. And I would look him in the eye and say, Arthur, I went up to the room. I've been That little extra effort in my junior year at Boston University paid off for years. I've been talking about performance because it can give you a leg up on the rest of the world and provide the personal satisfaction that comes from doing the best you can. But as important as achievement is in life, there's something that's even more significant. And it's the final message I want to leave with you. No matter how successful, how admired, how learned you become, it will mean little unless, as St. Paul says, you put love first. This is something that I did not learn until I was in my mid-40s. At that time, I left my job as a foreign correspondent with the New York Times to devote myself to investigating the facts surrounding my mother's execution by communist guerrillas in our village in northern Greece in 1948. I wanted to find out why and by whom she was arrested, tortured, and shot. I interviewed nearly 400 people all over the world who were witnesses to her ordeal. And I set out to kill the man most responsible for her death. But when I finally found him, a broken down old man, I could bring myself to do it because I didn't want my mother's story to be defined by an act of vengeance, but by her act of love and sacrifice. By the end of my journey, I had changed a great deal, and I learned something that more than compensates for the pain of the search. I learned that the thing that counts most, especially as you grow older, is the quality of the personal relationship you have with parents, children, friends, brothers, and sisters. My mother died to save her children, and she made me see how fortunate I am in the love of my children, my wife, and of the sisters who went through those terrible years with me. Her death made possible the lives and happiness of her 5 children, 13 grandchildren, and 24 great-grandchildren who've been born so far. That is why my mother's death is a triumph, not a defeat, and that is the discovery I made in research and writing my book, Eleni. Successful relationships need as much work as successful careers, especially in an era marked by isolated nuclear families, widespread divorce, and ruthless moving from place to place. I wish you all great success in achieving the goals you set for yourself today, but in the end you'll discover that nothing else, no material success, will mean as much as the love you have given and received. Give the coming years the best of your talent and energy, but don't overlook the love of the parents with you here tonight, who watch with a mixture of sadness and joy as you set out to discover your future. And give as much thought to the relationship you will build in that future with your husband or wife, your children, your friends. For in the end, that's what counts, and that's where you will find the only lasting satisfaction. But I can tell you from the vantage point of my 7th decade that after education ends and life begins, you will encounter many storms in your journey, many risks, many dangers. But Greeks were not meant to waste away in safe harbors. You were born to strike out to the open sea, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield to any fear. So lift your anchors and turn your eyes to the far horizons. Great adventures await you. Go and find them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So great.